In this tutorial, we're tackling a topic that often doesn't get openly shared between professionals: how to structure and present a client proposal. This video is a deep dive into the way architects frame their services, not just fees, but the process, deliverables, and expectations that define successful client-architect relationships. I'm Chris, an architect based in the UK, and in this lesson, I'll walk you through a fully editable architectural proposal template, which you can adapt for your own practice. We'll cover how to structure it, tailor it to different project types, and use it as a working document through the design and the permit process. Feel free to download the proposal template below to follow along or start building your own. Now, let's get started. So what is the purpose of an architectural proposal and portfolio? Your proposal is more than just a fee estimate. It's the foundation of your project. It lays out project scope, design phases, fees, responsibilities, deliverables, and timelines. It ensures your client understands the path from concept to permit to construction. It sets a professional tone that builds trust and clarifies expectations from the outset. A clear proposal reduces misunderstandings later and helps protect you from scope creep. And your design portfolio lets clients see your design aesthetic and previous experience. It ensures you're aligned with their design expectations and their needs. So if you're familiar with Rayon, you probably know it as a drawing tool, somewhere where you can draw plans, sections, elevations, even create mood boards or specifications and schedules. So we do all of that normally in the model space, and if you check out any of our other videos, you can see us diving into those aspects. Today we're going to be looking at the architecture proposal and portfolio, which I can do in Rayon as well, and it's an amazing tool, basically covering all these different aspects of your process as an architect. Most of our work would normally be done in the model canvas, which you can see here. It has all the tools for drawings, text, different types of annotations and zones. The paper canvas is normally used for your sheets, so when you are exporting your drawings and they're appearing on sheets, but it actually works as a really great place to create different types of sheets which are applicable for your fee proposals or your portfolios. You can see here, this is what I've set up. And the interface is very similar to what you might find in something like InDesign, where we have our documents, we have our separate pages. So this is a A4 document, which I've been able to set up. We have different aspects of the document, from front covers, different pages, which include a breakdown of fees and program, and even, aspects of terms and conditions, areas for the client to sign as a contract. And we can even import different images as our front and rear covers. And similarly, the portfolio, exactly the same process of setting up a series of pages. So our front covers, our spreads. We also have our guidelines all set up in there, and then a series of images to create our portfolio. This is all within the paper canvas of Rayon. So you can contain all aspects of your architectural project within one program. Let's jump into part one, the proposal. Remember, architectural fees can be complex, so your proposal's there to make them as transparent as possible. Here's a few tips. Use tables or phase breakdowns for fees. For example, feasibility, concept, design development, planning, technical design, and construction. Define clearly what's included and what is excluded, like engineering consultants, surveys, and statutory fees. Show a timeline with milestones and client responsibilities and sign-offs to keep the process on track. Let's jump into the proposal. So let's take a deep dive into the architectural proposal, which includes the program, the fees, and the deliverables. I'm giving you a sneak peek behind my own practice proposal document, so you're quite lucky there. So we have the front cover, we have the logo, which is obviously a PNG with a transparent background, which has just come out of my office standards. We have project name, date, project number, and document title. And we also have a rear cover. So this again is a standard pattern based on my logo, which sits within my standard files, and you can import those images directly into Rayon. Then we have a letter. So I always start with a letter. It very clearly explains about the project, about the process, and gives a kind of story of, what we'll be doing. I find it really helpful that alongside the very diagrammatic sense of the images later, you have something that really introduces the client to working with an architect, working with you in particular, and the processes that you'll be going through. So everything is set out. And particularly because I work in the sort of prime residential field, a lot of my clients are domestic clients that haven't worked with an architect before. A lot of my role is taking them through the process, introducing them to other consultants, introducing them to the stages that they need to jump through. Really, it's me as a guide on this sort of journey. So anything I can do to really help and explain the process helps across everything in the long run. And obviously as a letter, it has those standard things, a signature at the end, and my details. Then I jump into an explanation of the process. So as an architect based in the UK, we have the RIBA and the RIBA plan of work. And this basically breaks down the architectural sort of process into certain stages. And that's what I sort of put costs against each of these stages and when different things happen. So you can see here the standard plan of work, 0 to 7, starting with strategic definition, going through design, coordination, technical design, construction, and then handover and in use. And the idea is that it's this sort of cyclical thing. And in essence, in this proposal, I'm looking to be appointed up to planning stage. So I work on a lot of countryside houses, and they have quite complex planning cases. So my proposal normally gets split in half. So I get appointed up to planning, and then once we get planning, we then get appointed from planning to construction. And most clients like it that way. So we have a breakdown of the stages and then an explanation where they can find more about the RIBA plan of work. And then I split that down further. So obviously using the colors, which I've just introduced as part of the standard, I now talk about my specific plan of work, how I work as an architect. So from preparation and brief, so getting the brief from the client, getting to the heart of what they want, how they live, what their budget might be, then into the sort of site analysis stage, concept design, and I normally have a pre-app meeting with the council and then a design review panel. So that's a panel of other architects and experts to review the quality of the design that we're putting forward. Then we'll have RIBA stage 3, which is about coordination and sort of final documentation. And then we normally submit a planning application after stage 3. And then obviously there's a determination period with the planning and then a decision. And out of that, I sort of align these deliverables. So what is the client actually receiving, in terms of, paper almost? What are those deliverables that I'm going to be providing to them? So these are aligned at different stages. So the brief document, the analysis document, the presentation to the council and the DRP, and then design and access statements and drawings. So, what are those physical deliverables as part of the architectural process? And these are obviously aligned at different points, and these sort of gaps in between the color blocks highlight sort of key events along that program. So we're always talking about it in this sort of linear way. And then having broken down the process into those different stages and those deliverables, I then highlight a program. So how long each of those stages might take. This is quite indicative at this point. So it's just across months, but I've worked on projects where it's broken down into weeks rather than months, a bit more granular, but this is a sort of high level indicative one for this point in time. And again, it plots those elements across those stages as well. Then having set up that language of, breaking things down into those stages, I then break my fee proposal down into those stages. As I said, there's kind of a total fee. So it's from, the beginning to planning stage, which we can, talk about. But the reality is that most projects will be broken down into these stages. So, for stage 0, it's X, for stage 1, it's Y, for stage 2, it's Z. And you will have different amounts based on your time, based on the amount of value that you're providing at different points, based on the complexity at different points and how long things will take you. So obviously lots of different architects have different ways of working out fees, and sometimes it will be a percentage and sometimes it will be a time-based rate. So I do all of that in the background and then try and basically break it down for the client into invoices. As I said, the clients that I work with are normally domestic clients, so they appreciate sort of having a known invoicing schedule. So they know when I'll be requesting payment from them, and for me, it obviously helps cash flow. So I always ask for a mobilization fee, so to put some money against the project before I start, so that secures my time basically. And then I will break down the invoicing per month based on the different stages that we'll be doing. And again, I would always ask for money at the beginning of the stage and then money towards the end of the stage. And if the stage is longer, we break that up equally across those periods. So that sets out all of that very clearly. And rather than, the client receiving a random invoice one day and asking what it's for, you've got everything scheduled out. And obviously these things can adapt as well because programs can, extend or things can change. It also allows a client to stop and start a program, in terms of different stages, once they've signed off a stage or agree to move forward on a stage. And then because this fee proposal is being used as a simple letter form contract, it has some terms and conditions. So we put in these sort of standard forms which relate to the RIBA standard form of contract. And we include things like VAT. So that's obviously relevant to UK, limitations and exclusions. So what we are responsible for, what we're not responsible for, additional fees. So when things might be extended or design changes, how how that's covered. Things around signboards and marketing, so what we are allowed to do with the information, where we're allowed to share designs on social media, whether there's any sort of NDA elements to the project, and copyright. Then obviously we have elements around CDM and principal designers, so we have to let the clients know about the CDM regulations, about health and safety and the responsibilities about different parties. And then we have elements of due diligence like complaints procedures and the applicable law and the limit of the liability of the agreement. And then we have this final page which basically says this is, a simple form of contract which sets out these parameters, if you like, these sort of legal elements, and then, signed on behalf of the client and signed on behalf of the architect. And that very neatly wraps up those elements of the project. It sets everything out. It sets out really the process, the deliverables, the expectations from all parties. And for me, it really sets the tone of the project moving forward. It's nice and professional, it's nice and clear. It goes with all the branding of my company and sets everything out very well. And shortly, I'll show you how to set up a few examples of these pages. And also because it's available as a template, you can take this proposal and you can adapt it. You can use it for your local jurisdiction. You can look at your local legal frameworks, for example, whether you have a different sort of plan of work or process to things as well. It's really just about setting the groundwork, having those sort of boundaries set put in place. But this gives you the groundwork for that moving forward. Okay, part 2 is the portfolio. And remember, every project is unique, so your proposal should reflect that. Tailor the visual style and contents for your business and project type. Residential versus commercial, renovation versus new build. Make it relatable for viewers. Include different aspects of your experience, from site photos, finished renders, diagrams, and illustrations. It's all about communicating ideas and design experience. And show off your ability. Find your best work and put it on display. A great tip is to keep a few proposal templates saved for different project scales or types so that you can adapt quickly. Okay, now let's jump into the portfolio section. So I split my proposals into two. So I have my fee proposal as part 1 of the document, and then part 2 of the document is the portfolio. So my portfolio has the same front cover, same logo. Obviously the description is different. It gives an intro into me. Obviously as a small practice, they're buying into me and my ideas. So I talk about my experience, my story, and why I started the practice and, what I hope to achieve from it. I then give them my CV, so to show them my past experience. And then there is an array of different projects. So these are projects that I have worked on as my own practice, also projects that I've worked on in my previous practices. So obviously I state all of that. I've been able to, agree to the rights, the sharing of the rights of the images, for example. And then in each of these, I have a heading and then a description of, the project and what happened, my responsibility in it, and why that's relevant for, them and their project. The really helpful thing of setting up the portfolio as a sort of framework, so having these sort of 2-column approach, I find is that, when I want it to be a larger description, it can be, across one spread. I can also have 2 separate, projects for smaller projects. If I want to, that framework allows for it. It also allows me to do 3/4 images and 1/4 text, or do a sort of full spread image if I've got, a particularly interesting or compelling image that I want to show. And similarly, I also talk about my experience outside of, my practice, through things like my drawings and being featured in magazines or my podcast, for example. I always find it's quite interesting and helpful to show you have your foot in, other things in the profession, and you do other interesting things, or try and help people throughout the profession. You need to think about how you tailor your portfolio specifically to who you're talking to. As I said, I mostly deal with domestic clients, so most, all of these projects are either small houses or they're apartment schemes for residential or build to rent schemes. But, I have a few of these standard pages already set up, which allows me to drag and drop them in when I see fit. So if I had a commercial client come to me, I have a number of projects that I've worked on that will show that experience, and I can easily drag them in. They're in exactly the same format, and I can create a brochure that meets those expectations, that illustrates my abilities with that use class, for example, all very quickly, all very simply. It's about, again, setting the groundwork, setting these sort of parameters, setting these things up so that they fit together as a sort of kit of parts. The other thing I find is to have a nice mix of finished images, so things like these professional photographs, sketches, images, renders, obviously, things like this, which are competition entries, which show sort of the more creative side of things. Always think about editing down your best work. You don't need to show every drawing. You don't need to show every design. It's about finding, the thing that best communicates your skill, your ability, and your ideas. And really, that can be as long or short as you like. I like to keep it, within this sort of 8, 10, 12 page sort of format, because I think after a certain point, people get a little bit bored and, you want to keep it succinct. So I think having, something that picking those key projects that relate to the proposal is really, really key. Okay, having explored the contents of the architecture proposal document and the portfolio document, let's see how you can put those together in Rayon. Okay, so I'm going to show you how you can set up some of your own standard proposal and portfolio sheet. So we're currently in the model canvas and I want to jump over to the paper canvas. Currently your paper canvas doesn't contain any pages. We say create a page. You can do this as an A4, an A3. You can do it as a landscape sheet or a portrait sheet. Stick to an A4 landscape sheet. And I'm going to set out a series of these pages and I'll set up the sort of framework for us to work with. So I'll start with my front cover and then I'll have a series of 2 spreads, and then maybe these will be 10 millimeters apart. And I want to introduce some guidelines. So the tool down here next to shapes is guidelines. So the shortcut is G, and I set these at the edges of the pages, and I can set my sort of framework up. Similarly, I can introduce vertical ones. So if I go to G and then vertical, I can do exactly the same here and here. And the other thing I like to do is introduce a border. And this obviously helps me set out the text, any of the images on the page, and keeps things nice and consistent. So I can copy that grid line. I can set that at, let's say, 10 millimeters at the bottom and the top. And I can do exactly the same on the sides as well. And obviously I can copy those across onto the other side of the spread as well. So the other thing I want to do is set up my central split. So you remember I had those sort of 2-column approach to my pages, and again I'll set that 5 and 5, which means 10 mil. So my border is the same as my central column. So that sets up our standard single page, so our cover, and our standard spreads. The other thing I would like to do is to put those on layers. So I can have a grid line layer, I can select all the grid lines, I can put them on the grid line layer and then turn them off and on when I want to. And then if I want to basically just duplicate that, I can just select my pages, select my grid lines, and then basically just copy them down. And that sets everything out nicely. And obviously I can do exactly the same thing to copy across my pages for my portfolio. So again, that could be my portfolio stack. And I can even add some text into the sort of gray area to, highlight what these different things are. Or I can use the title element of this to say this is the front cover. So when I go to export that, I can find that in my drop down if I wanted to export it separately. So with the sheet set up, the next thing I like to do is set up my standard text types. So within the text tool, I'll just jump to the front cover, for example. I'll call this one heading, copy that down, call that one sub heading, and call that one body. So again, if you're familiar with programs like InDesign, this is all quite standard stuff to be doing to make sure that you have that consistency across your projects. So within these types, so I can save that as a style, call that heading. I can change the size, can change the font, can change the font style. So I'm going to set that one to maybe black is good. Again, with this one, I'm going to call this sub heading. I think size wise is good, but I'm going to have that in regular. And then for the body, I'll make a smaller font and put it in maybe light. So these are my sort of 3 types. Call that one body. And with those set up, any element of text that I then do, I can always just pick a style and that will flick back to a different style. And they all live within my styles area. So you have these styles here, which I can apply to different elements of text. And again, if I wanted to, I could go in and edit that style. I could change the font, for example, and that would change all elements of text that are painted with that style, basically. I'll also add a new text layer and make all of my text sit on there. Next, I'll show you how to import images. So as I mentioned, I have a series of sort of standard images within my documentation, so backgrounds, logos, the odd selfie, for example. So I can just go to import image, and I can import a background, for example. So I have a sort of paper texture as part of my sort of standard set. Again, I'll create a new layer, call that image, drag that to the bottom, so that's there. Again, I can import images. I can even import PDFs or DWGs if I wanted to, but I'll import my standard logo, which has a transparent background as it's a PNG. I can set that centrally. You can see there's different snapping to that as well. And then I can use my standard heading, and I can use my standard subheading. Each have a sort of container box around them, so you can set them out neatly. And, you know, I'd have project name, project number, date, and then in here I'd have probably document title, for example. Again, we can set those centrally, you know, and that can sit as your standard, and you can just fill those in as you see fit. Again, in terms of the letter, which is what I like to have next, I have my variation of my logo sits here, then have the client's address up here, and then address. I'd have the date. Obviously, you can set out your spacing, for example. I'd have dear client, and then I'd have sort of the subject, so already project at XXX, so where it is, what it is, or your project reference, for example. And then I'd have the body of the text. And obviously, I can set this text box to sit so it aligns neatly with my page, for example. And then I can just copy in some standard text there, add some breaks within the text. There we have it. And obviously I can have my signature, for example, which I have saved again as a PNG, so I don't need to physically sign it. So that would sit down here. So I'd normally say I can spell, and then my name, courtesy of Studio Simmons. And then I can import a signature. This isn't my signature, so no one try and copy it. This is just a stamp one I got off the internet, and you can obviously paste that in there. So that sets up your letter very quickly. Next, I'll show you the program and then the breakdown of fees. So to put a program together, basically I would be looking at creating a series of rectangles, for example. So say we've got 12 of these. We've got a little gap between them. You can obviously copy these across. So say it's across 12 months, I can grab all of those and size them to fit. Probably got a little bit of intro text at the top. So let's just delete some of this standard fill, bring these down slightly, call that project program, and then I can select these. I can save a style if I wanted to, so we'll call that program dates. We can add a fill, so we wanted a grey colour, so I took to 50% opacity, and again I can remove the stroke if I wanted to, and then I can use this text and I can detach that style and create a new style. So I can call that program dates, for example, so month 01, have that sit centrally. Again, we can just copy those across and then just adjust those numbers. And then from here we can copy some of these down and say maybe stage 0 is a month, and stage 1A, stage 1B is a month, stage 2A, stage 2B, stage 3. So maybe we'll set these to 2 months. You can see everything snaps nicely as well. Set that. So that's a sort of basic program, and we can obviously adjust these colors. So I could get rid of each of these, remove the style. This one is orange, these are pink, these are blue, this one is yellow, and again maybe I could say these texts should now be black. Detach those styles, color them black, And again, if I'm using these styles throughout, again, I could save this as stage 3, do these two as stage 2, these are stage 1. And then when I need to use those tones again, I know that they'll match perfectly. So that's a very, very simple program breakdown. And then maybe we'll think about maybe some of the key events that happen along or between those points. So for this one, let's detach this style. We'll make this just white, and then I'll add a stroke around it, set that 5, and then I can introduce a line, and I'll position that halfway between these two elements. And again, I can move that text down and say instruct maybe. So that's when the team is instructed. Make sure that that matches my 0.25. Again, I could set that up as a key event, something like that. And we could say at the end of stage 2A, there's a pre-app presentation to the council. And then we could say at halfway between there and there, we've got a DRP presentation, so a presentation to other architects and designers. And then at the end of stage 3, a planning submission goes there. So very quickly, that breaks down the process into, manageable, clear chunks, and you can get as granular as you want. As I said previously, you can break this down into weeks, so week numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But for this point, I've just illustrated it as months. Then we can look at the fee proposal, for example. So again, fee proposal, we have a little bit of text, and then next to the fee proposal, we have our sort of invoicing schedule. So now we can take boxes, example, say stage 0. I can add in a subheading in here, and then I can add in a here. So we'll say XX, however many pounds you want to charge. You can highlight those key events between, so instruct, move that up. We said pre-app, and then a DRP. And then we had our stage 3, this is stage 2B, 2A, 1B, 1. Submission. As mentioned previously, I can use my picker style, and I can just pick a style of here and make those match the colors that we set up. And even if I said, oh, actually that pink is a little bit lurid, and I want a sort of subtler one, I could say actually something like that might be better. And it changes all of them. Similarly with the blue, I could say actually I want that a little bit darker. And again, it changes everything. And then from here, I can then break down my invoicing. So again, I've sort of set up these lines, the language of what we're talking about. So I can say at the point of instruction, invoice 1, for example. You can say that is what it is, mobilization XX. Like that. Maybe we can make this a bit. And then here we could say under this fee we have invoice 2 and invoice 3, for example, and they are for half of fee. So that breaks down that total number that we're stating on the left hand side into two manageable chunks for the client and some cash flow for us. And you can just then go forward and say, so that's the same on that one, same on that one, same on that one. And then, maybe with this one, because it's a longer period, that's actually split into 4, for example. So we could say actually that's a quarter of the fee. Like that, we can sort out the numbers. And there we go. So we've got our fees, our total fees, and then our invoices. So they're spread out 12 invoices for a period of 12 months. So, we get payment every month, and we keep up our cash flow. The client's happy with the sort of breakdown of the fee. And obviously you can split your fee and do it however you see fit. And then lastly, I'll just show you an example of the contract element. So I can copy across my standard logo, and we can say agreement. Obviously we'd have some element of text to your wording, for example, and then we could say on behalf of the client, and we'd have a space for signature, name, and date. And I like to introduce a little line here. Again, I can set a style, add a dash, for example, change the line weight like that, for example, copy that up, just give someone somewhere to sign it basically. And then I can do exactly the same thing for the bit I would need to sign on behalf of the architect. And that very quickly, forms your agreement page, and you would get the client to sign that, send you back a physical copy or a scan so you could countersign it. And then lastly, I would just do the rear cover. So we've got our our document set up, our front cover, and then our back cover. So again, I have a standard pattern, which is a PNG, which I use as my rear cover. And I can turn off the grid lines and have a look how that looks. So you can see very quickly you can put together those key documents, and hopefully once you've set up those standards, you're able to adjust them for different projects. Okay, having looked at the fee proposal element, now let's look at the portfolio. So first things first is to copy across my standard front cover and rear cover. So I can do that simply by copying those across. Next, I can think about my text. So I've set up all those text styles, so it's easy just to move them across, set them out. I can adjust the boundary. I can maybe say this text is actually just slightly bigger. And this first page I use as a sort of introduction. Myself, my experience, why I started the practice, and what I kind of bring to the table. Normally pair it with this very glamorous selfie that looks not a lot like me, or me on a very good day. So that's my sort of intro page. I then have my CV. I'm just going to look at 3 different types of pages for my projects. So one is to show a project as a sort of full page. So we'll go for this project that I worked on in my previous practice. I've got some nice professional photographs from that. Obviously, I had to purchase the rights for these photos to use them from our professional photographer. And when I do this, I'm kind of thinking about one area that has a bit of text. So some sort of subheading text down here, maybe a paragraph that talks about the project, my experience. So that would smaller images that go alongside it. So it's nice to have a sort of selection of sort of internal views and external views as well. What we want to do is make sure everything is aligning nicely, set our sort of gaps exactly the same, gaps between images, and then I'll add in 2 more views as well. There we go. So that sets that out on that sort of full page spread. And these are obviously all finished images of the project. So if I was to do a second page, I might show some more sort of sketches or drawings to go alongside that. Similarly, if I want to look at maybe 2 smaller projects, for example, I can copy my text down. And then maybe we say there's a more sort of sketchy illustration style image here, and then that shows off one small residential extension project. And then we can use this one here for a small residential project that's been built, and then we can use 2 smaller internal views to go alongside that. Again, if I command drag, I can crop those images to make sure those gaps are the same. So you have example of 2 projects on one page, with the words doing a lot of the description. And then similarly, we could have this third page as a full bleed image. So you go to import image, could find an image that I particularly like. So this is a competition entry, and I can position that on the page. I've just got my sort of title of the image there. And again, it works really nicely because, through this series of pages, you have a sort of framework that you've set up, but you can interchange those different elements. And it's nice to have a different variety of images as you turn the page. It adds to that sort of intrigue, and, something like this large image will stand out because, you've had a series of smaller images previously. This is set out on a sort of 2-column grid system, and you can, look into lots of different types of grid systems that you can implement. There are lots of different examples in magazines. You can leave more white space if you wanted to, get some inspiration from other documents and move forward from there. The real key thing is being able to set up a series of project profile pages, really, filling out all the text similar to what you might have on your website, but creating these pages and then being able to chop and change them as you see fit. So once you've set up a framework and there is that level of consistency, when different projects come around, so you have different proposals, you can put those together in different orders, in different amounts. You can pick and choose which projects you want, whether it's a residential project or a commercial project, whether it's a new build or a retrofit, something like that. It's really helpful to have all these set up and then just collate them in different orders for your different proposals. And in terms of length, I tend to go for about 10 to 12 pages. Anything more and people start to get a bit bored. And I think having a succinct sort of collection of key projects which are relevant to your experience and relevant to the client's project which they're looking at is really, really key. So those are the two examples. And hopefully I've given you some ideas how to create your own or even use the template which we've already been provided to you. Once signed, your proposal can become the North Star for your project. Revisit it regularly to check scope, fees and milestones. Reference it during client or consultant meetings to keep decisions aligned with the brief. If you're using Rayon, you can embed your proposal diagrams, project scope notes or even early sketches directly into the drawing canvas to keep things in the same place. The best tip is to treat your proposal as a living document, not a one-time submission. So I've just jumped back to my original proposal document, the one with all elements completed. So I've got the proposal document on the left-hand side and the portfolio on the right. So what can I do with this now? So I can export it as a PDF, so in the sort of traditional way. One thing I always want to do first is turn off the grid lines, otherwise they'll appear on the drawings. But I'll go to export. I could export it as an image, so I could export the separate pages as images if I wanted to, or I can export the document, all pages, as a PDF. You can see that here. I'll call it proposal. I can say hi. And I'll press export. Okay, so I'll jump over to the desktop and I can see it there, proposal. I'll open it in preview. Let's jump to the front. And then you can see it there. So we've got a front cover, we've got our letter, we've got our plan of work, our breakdown of that plan of work with the deliverables, our program, the fee proposal in the invoicing, our terms and conditions, and then the element that we sign. And then we've got our second document, which has got my beautiful face, my CV, and some example projects, set out as we described, with some, further example of different bits that I get up to. So that's all great. The other thing we can do is share them. So over here we have a share button. So a nice bright blue button. And we can provide access to somebody else. So this could be your boss, it could be the client, it could be the project manager, for example. And you can add them as an editor or a viewer. So that's someone that could either edit it, so come in and make changes, or as a viewer, so they could add comments. So why don't I add a viewer? And I'll add in my other email address for my business. And I'll set that as a viewer. And I've just jumped into the other side of Rayon, so under my business email address. And if I go to shared with me in models, I will actually receive an email to highlight that. So whoever I've addressed the share element to, they'll receive an email saying that someone has asked you to look at this. But if I look into here, I can see the models that have been shared with me. I can double click on that. And now I'm looking at this as a viewer. So I can't edit it, but I can review it. So I can click on things. I just can't move them or delete them. But say I had a comment, for example. So you have these different tools down the bottom. One is measure, one is area. Obviously that's not relevant for here, but we have comment and markup. So I can add a comment to certain things. So say, for example, the stage 3, for example, I don't think stage 3 will take this long. Please reduce by 1 month. And post that, and that will stay in Rayon, and that will obviously come up on, and that will alert the other side of me that there's a comment on there. Similarly, I can do a markup. So, I could add something here and a little arrow, for example, to make it very clear where that is and what I want someone else to do. And now jumping back into my original identity, I can now look at comments. So you can see there along this tab, there's comments. and you can see one annotation comment and one text comment, and it will show me in space where that is. I can click on it. It has that comment when it was issued. I can add a reaction, so you can be as funny or cute as you want to be, or you can add a reply. So, okay, that sounds good. I will update. Do you think should adjust the overall fee based on the program reduction? And obviously that sets up a back and forth to whoever you're talking to. So it's a really, really handy thing. It keeps everything logged, everything's saved, and you don't have to export things, send them over email, go back and forth. It's all very fluid, all very quick and easy, and it's all within the browser. And the other thing I can do is share it as a presentation. Let's say I've made all my final amendments, for example. I can share this link as a presentation. So I just go to presentation and I click this little tab here, and it will give me a link. And that link I can send to the client. And that's a really useful thing, because instead of having to PDF it, download it, save it onto a file transfer site, send a link in an email, I can just share this link. So let's say we can just open it from here, and you can see those pages as a very clear presentation, just like you would a PDF. I can obviously zoom in, zoom out, come out of there. I can go full screen as well. And the really good thing is if I make an amendment, for example, I can then update the link. So it will always be up to date as long as I'm clicking the up to date button. So the client will be able to see any changes you're making without having to relink it, which again is really, really helpful. And as we alluded to earlier, having the document as this kind of living, breathing thing that not only forms part of the original stages, but is something that you go back to, having it accessible to all members of the team within your company, for example, is really, really helpful, because we can look back on it, we can see what we've agreed, we can see what's part of the deliverables, what the scope is, and keep everything neat and tidy, and keep a log within the document. So it's a really helpful way that Rayon works. And also this can be alongside all your drawings, all your sketches, all your annotated plans and elevations and sections. We have all this documentation. It's all in one place, in one piece of software, all within the browser. And for me, that's a big game changer. That wraps up our walkthrough of the architectural proposal and portfolio. As you've seen, a strong proposal is not only about securing the project, it's about setting up every phase for success. By customizing your template to reflect your process, deliverables, and professional style, you can create clarity from the very first meeting and show your client exactly what kind of architectural experience they can expect. Don't forget to download the free editable template below and adjust it to your work. Give us a like, a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Cheers, and I'll see you next time.